Hi there, Agile friends. Get ready for the World Tour of Agile at the Agile Online Summit 2023. You can join us from October 24th to 26th for a global showcase of cutting-edge Agile practices and insights. Join us at agileonlinesummit.com. This year, we will be featuring some of the best work done around the world and world-class keynotes. You can check all of that at agileonlinesummit.com. But the best part is that your ticket is on us. That's right, it's free to attend and immerse yourself in the world of Agile excellence. Don't miss out on this opportunity to level up your skills and network with peers and industry experts. Mark your calendars and secure your spot at AOS 23 today by visiting agileonlinesummit.com. So get your free ticket or opt for the full digital pass that lets you keep all the conference videos forever and organize, why not, Agile learning sessions at work. You can get the full digital access at agileonlinesummit.com. I'll see you in the conference floor. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special bonus episode of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. And today we have with us Thomas Curran. Hey, Thomas, welcome to the show.
Hi, Vasco. Lovely to be here.
So Thomas is an associate professor at the Department of Psychological and Behavioral Science at the London School of Economics. That's a mouthful right there. And he's also a leading expert on perfectionism, the topic of today, and also his recent book, The Perfection Trap. He has written for the Harvard Business Review, was featured in The New Scientist, and his work has been covered by publications including Guardian, Telegraph, Wall Street Journal, and Arianna Huffington's Thrive Global campaign. In 2018, he gave the TED-Med talk entitled Our Dangerous Obsession with Perfectionism is Getting Worse. And Thomas, I bet you did a lot of rehearsals for that talk, right?
I did a lot of rehearsals for that talk. I actually got a speaking coach and a performance body language expert. So the whole works. And all of it went from my mind as soon as I stepped on the stage.
Yeah, and that's quite normal as well. So much invested into that moment, right?
Yeah, so much. And there's a lot of pressure, and you kind of have this idea that this is how I'm gonna deliver it, and this is what I'm gonna say, and then you get on the stage and you just want to get to the end. You just want to make sure you don't screw up.
So we're going to talk about the topic of performance, of course. We are all performance, Scrum Masters, team leads, product owners, and of course, Thomas, at least on that TED-Med talk. And you wrote the book, The Perfection Trap, where you describe it as an exploration of how the pursuit of perfection can lead to burnout and depression. Can you share some of the key factors that contribute to this dangerous obsession, maybe we could call it, with perfection?
Of course. So perfectionism, first and foremost, it's important to say that perfectionism often gets confused with similar things like conscientiousness, meticulousness, diligence, perseverance, all these lovely, wonderful ways of striving, that are very optimistic and come from a very active place, wanting to do better, wanting to grow, wanting to improve. Perfectionism is not like those things, even though it gets confused with those things, because on the surface, it looks like that. But what's happening underneath is that perfectionistic people are extremely uncertain, insecure, and they worry all the time about whether they're good enough, whether they're perfect enough. And their main imperative, I suppose, is to ensure that everybody and all around sees a perfect, flawless, excellent performer, parent, employee, whatever it is that is important to us. And that's the most important imperative. And so what perfectionists tend to do is they recoil from situations of challenge and failure, or where they might be evaluated maybe critically, because that then exposes some deficiency or flaw that they're trying to disguise. And that's why it can be really problematic in the context of burnout, for instance, because that's a lot of emotional energy that's invested in trying to prove all the time that we're perfect. But also when it comes to performance, because perfectionist people tend to recoil from challenging situations where there's a high likelihood of failure, which in your world, Vasco, is extremely common, right? There's, you're going into tasks and projects where you're unsure whether the coding that you're going to do is going to be right, or there might be some mistakes or errors that slip through the net. And this is common. And these failures and mistakes are common, but for perfectionist people, they're really difficult to deal with because they've shown to other people that we're not the perfect person we're trying to project into the world. So, mm, mm, mm. Mm. Well, that's exactly it. And these very public forms of exposure, where perhaps we've made a mistake, we're in a group meeting session, and that mistake suddenly comes to light. This is the big fear for the perfectionistic person, because suddenly now it's not just a mistake that I've made, that I know I've made, that I've screwed up. Now everybody can see it. Everybody's judging, everybody's watching, and they're they're going to have their own feelings and thoughts about that particular mistake. And in most cases, in our mind's eye, perfectionist mind's eye, they're very judgmental, they're punitive. So this is a crucial problem, particularly in the modern workplace, and particularly things like engineering, creative, marketing, sorry, I said engineering, but technology, where anything is creative, anything is new, starting from scratch, or things can go wrong. It's really difficult to perfection, particularly in public. So this is why you tend to see these tendencies start to emerge when perfectionism meets challenge, and that's going to happen all the time, as we just discussed. And they really find it difficult in those situations because suddenly a chink in the armor has been exposed. They worry about that. They ruminate on it. They criticize themselves. How could you be so stupid? What were you thinking? Why didn't you see that mistake or error? Very, very harshly self-critical. And then in response, they overcompensate. So the next time they go to work, they then try to work harder, set even higher goals, hold themselves to even higher standards. But of course, those standards are really difficult to meet because they're really high. So they find themselves making mistakes, failing again. And so begins this cycle where you can begin to see how that can create a lot of distress, low self-esteem, burnout, etc. So that's the reason.
But let's dive into that a little bit, because we all want to be good enough, right? We all want to perform well in our jobs. We all want to be better tomorrow than we were yesterday. Those are normal aspirations, if we could call it so. But what you're talking about is a specific way in which people try to be better, right? So what is that dynamic? How can let's say I'm a Scrum Master out there facing my team every day, facing stakeholders every couple of days. They are high pressure situations for us, Scrum Masters and team leads and product owners. How can I know, am I being perfectionist? In the sense that you describe in the book, so right, like this negative cycle that you just described, or am I just wanting to be proud of what I do? Where is the line? Like, do I know if I'm going into a spiral of negativity like you described, or am I still on the safe and healthy side?
Well, the thing is, you talk about being proud of what you do. Perfectionists simply cannot derive any satisfaction or pride from success. So if you've done something well, you've completed a project, the code you've written or whatever it is you've created has gone well, it's been delivered, people are happy with it. The feeling inside should be one of satisfaction and pride. Actually, you've done something really good there, and you've been a successful part of the team. However, if you're a perfectionistic person, you're not going to feel very much pride or satisfaction. You're going to feel a lot of relief. Thank goodness nothing went wrong on this occasion, right? And that's the difference. So people who have more healthier ways of striving, things like conscientiousness and meticulousness, they can carry themselves into tasks knowing that something may go wrong. That's okay. We need to respond to it as long as we learn from it, as long as we're open enough to be accountable and say, okay, hands up, made a mistake in that bit of code, that will need to be resolved, and we can go back, we can iterate, we can make things better, we can improve it. It's like a step-by-step progressive process. This is how people with high levels of conscientiousness and meticulousness work. That's really good. No problem with that. And then when they do succeed, when the project's gone off, it's been a success, they can look back at all the learning they've done, look at the end product and be very satisfied with that, move on to the next thing. That's not the case with perfectionists. They're trying to disguise all the time. They're trying to hide. If they make mistakes, it's unlikely that they'll bring them forward until they've been, until perhaps it's to a
Too
point
late,
where
yeah.
it's a bit too late, right? So in terms of people and managers, the key thing really is to create a space for mistakes and allow people actually to bring them forward without fear of having their head cut off. You know, like, it's okay in this space right now. If you know something's not quite right, or it's not running properly, or there was a mistake back in the chain, or whatever it might be, bring it. This is most important. Open lines of communication. Let's talk about them. There's no judgment here. It's all about we're all pulling in the same direction. And the most important thing is that the end product works, right? And how we get there is not going to be a straight line. There's going to be ups and downs, going to be mistakes. People are going to miss things. That's totally normal, totally natural. Nobody's perfect. And if you can create that culture, Amy Emerson calls it a culture of psychological safety, where people feel very safe to be imperfect, I suppose, then that's going to be like taking a sledgehammer to people's perfectionism, because suddenly now they feel liberated to be open about their shortcomings or the mistakes that they've made. And I think that's so important on a cultural level, and on an individual level, it's also important to recognize that it is okay to fail, and that the most important thing is that the project gets delivered. And so you have to remember at all times that that's more important than you. So make sure that if you have made a mistake, even if it's a big mistake, that you bring it straight away to the team. You say, this is what's happened. I know what went wrong. I know how to fix it, and we're going to put it right. But I need you to know that this is what happened. So that's so important. Open honesty, honest lines of communication.
One of the companies where I worked before, they had this value that we want bad news first.
Yes.
And that was a clear way to communicate that actually we need to discuss those things. And as you said, once you create that open and safe space to talk about the mistakes we make, then it's much easier to get out of that negative spiral of perfectionism. But of course, there's a lot invested in this. In your book, you talk about individual introspection, which we just talked about, but also broader social change. Let's start with ourselves, though, because as Scrum Masters, we need to be a role model for our teams, right? We need to show that it is okay to make mistakes, that it is okay to talk about mistakes. So how can our listeners be more aware and learn how to step back from the perfection trap, as you call it in the book, and be more aware when they are not able to? So give us some ideas, some thoughts, some tools for us to be aware and act.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, if you're managing teams, you're in a privileged position, because you've worked yourself up to a place where more broadly anyway, you're relatively secure, and it's okay. You can be the most open and honest about the mistakes that you make, because you've obviously got to that place because you've been successful, and that success has come through many successes, of course, but also a lot of failures along the way. And I think the most important thing to do is, particularly when you're new to a team, but even when you're established, is to let people know straight away, if they're new to the team, that that failure is okay. Like, making mistakes is okay. Screwing up is okay. These things just happen. And give an example in your career where that's happened to you, because I can tell you now, there's something incredibly liberating about sharing times when things haven't gone quite so well, because that's our common humanity. And as soon as people hear that, there's almost a sigh of relief. I mean, I do this to my students all the time. I tell them that I made mistakes in research papers, and they can't believe it. Like, oh my God, like, how can you make a mistake in a research paper? That's like, blasphemy. You can't do that. Yeah, well, it just happens. Like, we're imperfect and we make mistakes. And that's, it's not just me, it's every professor will have a story where, they've made a mistake, whether it be in a research paper, it be in a talk, whatever. And that's the same for engineers. It's the same for anyone in any role that will have made mistakes in the past. And that's so important. The first thing that people know is that it's okay. These things happen. It's part and parcel of life, not just work, of life. And as long as we can embrace that, as long as we can talk about and be open about, have clear lines of communication when those things go wrong, right? Bring that bad news first, because That's way more important than bringing good news at the start and then finding actually we can't complete because something happened that we didn't discuss. So yeah, Vasco, I can't emphasize enough. That is so incredibly important, particularly in a just-in-time economy where innovation is so important. Creativity is so important. These things happen quickly, right? We don't have time to dwell. We don't have time to hold things back. We don't have time
to hide the mistakes, right?
You just don't. So it's so important from the get-go that people know it's okay. It's okay to fail. We're imperfect. That's right. But it has to be open. You have to bring it to me straight away.
So as managers, we can give that example, right? But we do need to be aware that we are giving the example, and we need to be aware when we're doing the opposite, right? When we're hiding. So do you have some tips, some maybe heuristics that we can use to ask ourselves, am I keeping true to my goal of being honest and sharing mistakes?
Yeah, I think sometimes, obviously, if you're at the top of the food chain and you're in command of the project going off, you will be able to see things and mistakes in your own work that you perhaps made that nobody else will see because you're the ultimate one to put them right and send them off. So a lot of those things can often stay behind closed doors, and that's fine. As I said, sometimes that's what it needs to be done like that because it needs to be done really, really quickly. But I do think, in general, as a general rule, it's so important to lead by example. And if there is a case where you've encountered a setback, a challenge, it doesn't even have to be a mistake. It could just be a challenge. Something's got in the way. Things have had to slow down for X, Y, and Z reason. And it's so important that we just talk about that. We're open about that. We make sure that everybody knows this is a situation for the project right now, and this is why. And sometimes it will be because of mistakes that we've made, and that's really important. That it shows your team that failure is just part and parcel. Like, it's a very humanizing thing. It's not humiliating. It should never be humiliated. These are just things that happen in part and parcel of a very complex projects. And yeah, like I say, you've just got to be open. When it comes to a heuristic, I'm not sure there's anything that I can contribute above and beyond that broad philosophy of just making sure that everybody on the team knows that this is a safe place, and that is the most effective way to break down perfectionistic tendencies within the team. Because if you let them, they will have a tremendous negative impact on performance. Because what people tend to do if they feel like failure isn't acceptable, mistakes aren't acceptable, is they tend to recoil, they tend to withhold, they tend to procrastinate, avoid, and these things are not in any way conducive.
And we can, through that inaction, if you will, also unintentionally create the space that is no longer safe to share mistakes, right?
Yeah, it's just exactly. It can snowball. These things are, they're self-fulfilling. Once that culture gets entrenched, it's really then difficult to break it down without, big interventions. So from the get-go, it's so important to create that kind of culture. And you have to remember, by the way, you've selected these individuals because presumably they have skills and talents that have meant that they're, very valuable members of the team. So trust them. That's also important. You have to trust people within your team to do the job that they've been employed to do, and without overly micromanaging, because that also is important.
That's something that you say in the book, letting go to focus on what matters the most. And I think for Scrum Masters, this is very important, but I want to hear it from you. What do you mean with that phrase, letting go to focus on what matters most?
Well, what matters most is to get the project done in this particular context. So it doesn't matter about whether it's perfect. It will never be perfect. I can tell you now, there are hundreds of versions of the same project that you could submit that will be just as good as each other, right? It's a good enough project if it gets out there and it is effective and it does what the client has asked for it to be done, or it has the functionality that's been requested, or whatever it is, right? That's the most important thing. And if you take perfectionistic tendencies into your work, then you will find it's not just that you miss mistakes and things slip through the net, but also that you're going to really struggle to get it over the line, because there's going to be something else and something else and something else that you want to bolt on to make sure that it's flawless, that it's bulletproof, that it's going to the client or whoever is accountable to, in a spotless condition. Well, there is no perfect product. There are many, many hundreds of thousands of good enough projects. And I think that's the most important thing to bear in mind whenever you start any project, whether it's a book or whatever it might be. It's so important to recognize that when it's good enough, when it works, it's good enough. Let's get it off. Let's move on to the next thing.
And I think one of the things we need to be aware is that perfectionism will not show up only at work, right? It extends beyond our professional lives, and it can go into our roles as family members as well. So how does your book address the potential conflicts and challenges that arise when the pressure to be perfect, which we put on ourselves, spills over into our personal lives and relationships?
Yeah, and it does. You will definitely see a lot of the burnout that you see at work will come from work and the need to work and do more and be more, seeping in and having an impact on family life, feeling guilty when we're not at work and not producing and not earning, which means we work too hard, sacrifice those times with our family and friends and all the rest of it. And rejuvenating activities like diet, health, sleep, all of these things we see in perfectionistic people a lot. It's this idea of diminishing returns, right? So you work too hard, you work to a point, and then you work over that threshold. So the returns to your hours at work now become lower, and then at some point they reverse. That's to say that any additional time you're putting in actually compromises your work because you're tired. You see, you're stressed. You're not rejuvenating yourself, which we know are really important activities. So time with family and friends and away from work is so important, and it's so important to recognize that there is more to life than work. For some of the things that bring us the most joy, things outside of the workplace. That's not to say, by the way, you can't have purpose and meaning from your job. I think that's so important. Absolutely, you can. But nevertheless, the things that bring us most joy are those times and moments in our communities, with our family, with our friends, perhaps with our children, if we have them. Those are the things I think that are so important, and you must always prioritize them at all times, because they're what makes life most meaningful. So try not to slip into the perfection trap of thinking that everything has to be revolved around your productivity and how much you're earning or what you're making or whatever. There is a bigger picture, and that's important to recognize.
And none of it will ever be perfect. And that's also important to recognize, just like writing a book, right? So here's a trick question for you, Thomas. How did you get out yourself? How did you get out of the perfection trap when writing your book?
Well, it's so important also to recognize too that I think we think there's a trade-off, like, more time at work means more productivity. That's not the case. Actually, like, if you come to work replenished, rejuvenated, happy, and with low levels of stress, you're going to be more productive than if you're working your butt off every single day. And that's so important, right? And this is, unfortunately for perfectionistic people, and I count myself in this, it's really hard to see that bigger picture, because you think all the time about the minutiae detail about what you're producing in the moment and how well you're doing now. And there's a lot of pressure out there, by the way, in the wider world. Things are expensive right now, and you feel like you're going to get left behind if you don't continue to put one foot in front of the other. And certainly for the book, for me, was very much, I put a lot of pressure on myself to make sure the book was really, a good read, that people would review well, and that they would give good ratings to, and all the rest of it, because this is what we worry about as perfectionists, what other people think and how it's going to be received by other people. So yeah, a massive challenge, but no different, but I would say, to anyone else doing any other type of work. It's always going to be evaluated. People are always going to have their say. Whenever you've produced something or created something and put it out into the world, there's always going to be feedback, sometimes good, sometimes bad. And I think these are worries that we all harbor at some level. Just perfectionistic people perhaps struggle with them a little bit more. And yeah, through the process of writing the book, it really triggered my perfectionism quite a lot. But what's really interesting is actually it's the aftermath that's helped me most. When I actually let it go and put it out into the world, that's what really, I was able to sit back and reflect that the thought of failure or whatever is harboring in my mind when I was writing it is not as catastrophic as I thought it was. You get a bad review and it's fine. You just, you spend time with your family and friends and forget about it. yeah, it's just not as catastrophic as you make it out to be. And so it's actually when you've delivered something that you can release from perfectionism. But when you're doing it, you can be trapped in that mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. I work with authors. We have a publishing house here at Oikosofi, and I'll definitely use your words to tell them it's when you let it out and put the book into the world that you can feel the pleasure of having completed something. And it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be good enough. And as you said, one bad review is not a problem.
And of course, you're going to get bad reviews, by the way. So
you're definitely going to get bad reviews. If you don't have a bad review, it's because there's no opinion in the book, right? Like that's a friend of mine once told me that, okay, so somebody criticized you. Great. Now you've made an impact.
Yeah, that's right. It's true. It's so true.
People will, of course, be curious where to get the book, and it is in the usual places. So all your online outlets and your local bookstores, at least in some of them. But where can people find out more about you, Thomas?
I have a website, Tom Curran. It's Tom spelled THOM, Curran spelled CURRAN.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter. If you just type Thomas Curran, the Perfection Trap into Google, all the relevant links will come up. And if you do go ahead and buy the book, I really love to hear from readers. So please do feel free to reach out through one of those channels, because it's really nice when people have read the book and you know, they have some feedback or they have an opinion, and
it doesn't need to be perfect either.
And it doesn't need to be perfect. Just get in touch, because I really love to hear from people.
And I bet that a lot of our listeners are feeling this very close to home, because we are, as a community, quite much perfectionism oriented, because we do suffer from criticism, and it's okay to be criticized. I just wrote, as you were saying, that receiving feedback is a critical skill for us as Scrum Masters. And I might be writing a little bit about that shortly, because it is critical to understand that both positive and negative feedback, we need to receive that. Receive meaning hear, reflect, and of course take whatever we can, and then the rest we forget, because not everything is relevant. Thomas, before we go, what's one parting word of advice that you have for our audience?
One parting word of advice. Well, the biggest one, and I know it's a cliche, but done is way, way better than perfect. And progress is better than perfection. You have to always keep moving forward, of course. You want to improve and want to get better, but it's so important that you recognize when a job is good enough and be able to let it go. Knowing that it might be criticized, and it will be praised, and there will be people having to say, and these things are all okay. They're all part and part of sort of a bigger picture, a bigger learning process in your own personal journey. So feel the fear, do it anyway, let it go, keep moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Thomas, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Thank you, Vasco. It's been great to chat.
We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.